I almost wish this thing would not start out on the selfie mode. All right, shall we begin? Mic check, audio check. Can you hear me? There's sound settings. All right. I have here is a Pixie CW transceiver. These are typical of the kits you'll find on eBay. This one was a friend of mine, and I'm now finally getting the chance to sit down and assemble it. So, thank you, Professor. The assembly instructions consist really nothing more than the schematic diagram and the bill of materials, if you're able to see that. So, going to start with the resistors. The bag of connectors, along with the other almost forgotten projects on my workbench. So I've got to work through the queue to actually see the bench again. Separating out all the capacitors from the resistors. And I have a sneaking suspicion that this is actually an inductor, but I could be wrong. Yeah, there's at least one inductor on the schematic. I don't know. First one, should I get the fluke meter out and check these resistors to see if they're anywhere near being in tolerance? Yeah, let's do that. Discovered over the years the difficulty of collecting electronics tools and just electronics in general. Unless you have adequate space to store them and a really good way to organize it, it becomes this giant piled disaster where you can't find anything when you want to use it. is no fun. Why is my phone chiming? Battery's good, and I have it plugged in to make sure the battery doesn't run out. So let's start with resistor 1, which should be a 47 kilo ohm resistor. It should be this one right here, unless my eyesight is gone. .469 K ohms. No. Oh, that's brown. $99.7K. Yeah, that's correct. Something I've discovered with the these blue-bodied resistors is that here we go, 46.5 kilo ohms. Should be is that brown or red? What does the flashlight say? Brown. That would make that yellow, violet, black, red, brown. So it's 5 bands. So it's supposed to be 1%. Let's get the old calculator out and see what it says. What did I say? 46.5? Within 1%. That one's intolerance. Is the air conditioning overriding my voice? Or is it? So, unlike other people who use the nice component lead formers, I do it the cheap way. Alright, so the large exploded diagram showing the component placement tells me that resistor 1 goes next to the power jack, and it's hairpinned. Joy. I had one of those nice circuit board frames that actually put all the resistors in, put it in the frame, and then solder them all at the same time. Because I don't have that, I'm just going to do them one at a time. From my past experience in production assembly, I found that those frames tended to cause the components to hang down a little bit, so I always found the finish that those gave, at least from commercial manufacturing, to be less than what I considered desirable. Also reminds me of a company that I had worked for, which I'm not going to mention, that manufactured power supplies. And to my horror, one day as I was walking from my area to the, I think it was the restrooms, just shoulder surfing and watching some of my coworkers do repair work, whereas they had me doing initial assembly off the pick and place machine. And when they get a power supply back where the transistors had obviously exploded, they would just cut out the obviously blown up ones, desolder them, and then replace those, leaving the other ones that appeared to be unharmed, and then send them off to be recertified. And, realizing that after those parts had been stressed that way, that the ones that were remaining were the next ones that were going to fail, and this is why the power supplies would continually come back to us for remanufacture because they were being cheap. All right, the 33K shows up as 33.33K. Let me see if I can adjust my other monitor so that I can actually see what you people are typing while I'm actually sitting over at the other desk. No, Thundersqueak, that is not a knock against you for using the lead former. The iron is a Weller WES D51. It's temperature controllable with the a lockout. So had I been using this at work years ago, they'd dial the temperature in for me and then prevent me from adjusting it, which was kind of comical because I actually know how to solder. Resistor 2 is located. It's resistor 3, diode 2. Where are you? R2 is also next to the power connector, and it's right over here. Now, I'm simply trusting that the silkscreen on this board is correct because I have no idea. What? Yeah. Heaven forbid if, resistors could actually be put in backwards and it mattered. One of my pet peeves with installing parts is, at least with a resistor, if you can see it on this, to not have the body of it actually not sitting against the board, just have it floating on the end of the leads. Age-old Xerons. I cannot tell you how long I've had these wire cutters. I don't even remember when I bought them. Resistor 3. R1, R2. Resistor 3 is probably somewhere part of the audio circuit. So 1K from plus battery down to a filter cap feeding power into the audio amp. I'm gonna say it looks like a pull-up resistor. No, it actually feeds into VS on the LM36 audio chip. Actually, Thundersqueak, in reference to the inductors, it is possible to put them in wrong. However, if it's just a single inductor, it is usually not an issue. However, if it's part of a transformer or some other more complicated configuration, then yeah, it is possible to get the phasing wrong. 0.987K. This one's a little on the low side. In reference to my 3D printer, it's a Tron XY P802MA variant. I'm having some difficulty after a successful print, how when it would recalibrate to go on to the next one, how it would crash the print head into the printing bed, which is very annoying. But from what I'm gathering, I think my initial guess of it being an issue of the vertical axis not having any anti-backlash, which it doesn't, is not necessarily the case because when it's printing, it's always moving in the same direction. So the only time you ever really end up dealing with any sort of backlash is doing that the test where it touches off the platform and with the auto leveling because it basically dips the head 9 times. So there's a possibility during that for a misalignment to creep in. But the other thing that I'm running into is now that I put a piece of 3mm glass on the surface to make it easier to release the printed object when the bed cools, is the inductive sensor that it uses for the non-contact sensor. It'll do the touch off properly, but then when it does the auto level, it's a couple millimeters too high so that you're not printing on the glass, you're printing above it. And I've tried compensating for it in the software. However, there seems to be another problem. Something that could very well be a firmware issue that I have yet to dig into. No, Thundersqueak, those are not video game sound effects. That's my phone notifying me of something that I probably would just rather ignore. So it's something you probably don't deal with using your webcam. Four 4K webcam. I wouldn't be able to view that on my monitor. I only have 1080s. 468 ohms, or what should be 470. Resistor 4 is located. Where is it located? Next to the key connector, right here. Mailman bought you a surface mount kit. just brought. Red, green, blue amp for TurboGrafx 16. So what is an RGB amp for a TurboGrafx 16 Thundersqueak? Resistor 5 is at 10K. Ah, an interface adapter. Yeah, when reading up on the Atari 7800, when I had realized that they're using two different graphics chips in there for compatibility, I had wondered if it's possible to split out the TIA video output from the what is it, Maria graphics chip on that system so that they're separate. Yeah, I didn't really know about SCART until a couple of years ago. Seems like a pretty decent idea to dumb down the interface to have a common plug. Whereas here in the states we have it's probably something close to a dozen connectors now, depending on your configuration. If you're using component video with multi-channel audio. The resistor 5 is located where? Next to the key connector. Wow, that's a pretty pricey video adapter there. Wow. No one's buying an entire television for that. $400 for a was it XRGB Mini? Yeah. Resistor 6 goes next to the crystal. Yeah, that was another common thing that the component video was used for at least years ago, going from HDMI to component and then back, was that it removed any of the encodings from the HDMI. There was a device that's on some sort of crowdfund thing now that does it directly in digital from HDMI in to HDMI out. It was designed for doing video overlay stuff for like voiceovers or like credits and whatnot, but it has the ability to remove the encryption. So it also has the ability to remove the copy protection. I found it rather unusual that the guy doing I guess the marketing campaign for the thing, pretty much clearly states that it's in violation of federal law because it can remove the copy protection. It's like, yeah, that didn't seem smart. Like all things, I kind of like the example of Canada's uh, scanner law, whereas here in the states, it's illegal to own a radio receiver that was capable of tuning into the analog cellular telephone channels for eavesdropping. Whereas in Canada, you can own the receiver, but what they do control is what you do with what you the content. Whereas if you were to record some like politician's telephone call, you couldn't broadcast it on the rebroadcast it to anyone because that would be in violation of their law. Whereas the amusing part here in the states is that it's illegal to intercept the information. Yet once you have it, is another story. Why this thing is chiming, I have no idea. Why is it chiming? There's three people watching. Oh joy. Who would that be? I know of one. Yeah, if I only had anything to drink, Thundersqueak. That would more resemble a like an old television show of Julia Childs drinking all the wine while cooking. Not the best solder joint, but it'll work. Madurian Spray. Yes, yes, indeed. Is that the melon flavored liqueur, if I'm not mistaken? Thunderscreek? Very, very green. Was that the Romulan ale, the one that was known for giving the terrible, terrible hangovers? Ugh. Does Midori have lots and lots of sugar in it? So it quite literally is Romulan ale because if you drink enough of it, it'll give you a terrible hangover the next day. Do not drink it. No kidding. Mm, lucky you. Adjustable resistor W1. Interesting. She buried behind, oh, over that way. There's under a box. I've got an old phasing kit that I need to put together, and it needs a local oscillator, which I'm going to use the Silicon Labs SI 50. Is it 5351A? To allow put quadrature pair. but the mixers need enough signal, so I got to build an amplifier and use these inductors as chokes for the amps. So, step by step. In reference to the robot in the video, yes, it's interesting. Was that a commercially made toy, or was that something that you built? Because the interaction from it at least shows that it's something a little more recent. Is the interaction a loop, like similar to the Furby interaction, or is there a little more going on with the user interface? How does it? How is it doing the recognition? Is it based on interaction or is it photographic? I would wonder how the AI on that thing compares to a honeybee. I've read studies that the honeybee is able to recognize human faces and remember for its lifetime, which is, I don't know, what is it, a couple weeks? Same with wasps, with the researchers had initially thought of using it for identifying people in airports that are on watch lists because the flying beasts could be trained by pictures, but the amount of effort to train them because they're only good for a couple of weeks was deemed to be too much effort. Plus, rather annoying to have bees flying around an airport to like sting people that are wanted. I mean, it would quite literally be the Nicolas Cage uh, act with the bees. Oh well. On the edge of the board, I don't know if you can see it. It's trimmed right to the into this hole for the headphone connector. I think this would be the ground connection. You can see right here that it's not even a round hole. It's actually broken through right into it. And there's my fingernail right in the hole. Yes, Chinese kids. But I can't complain because this one was free. All right, all of my resistors are installed. Now let's move on to the inductors. There's L1, L2, and L3. It's a 22 microhenry, a 1 microhenry, and a 100 microhenry. Now, I actually have an inductance checker around here. The question is, where did I put it? And do I actually want to go through the effort of using it? I think probably not. Yeah, what I actually wanted to find was something that has, speaking of sensors, something that will do fairly accurate pulse oximetry for blood oxygen. I've had a number of different fitness trackers that I had tested that had the oxygen sensor, and they're all terrible. One of the ones that was the most promising would only do a spot check where you'd tap it and it would tell you right then and there. What I was looking for was something that would data log the oxygen content. Why is this thing chiming? Is the battery dying? Can I turn the volume down? Hold on. I don't know what's going to happen, so please stand by. Alright, I silenced the phone, so I think I may have put an end to the drinking game. Yeah, sorry, Thundersqueak. I put an end to your drinking game. You're going to have to moderate it on your own. I think the first one I can manage, which this one is obviously the 22 microhenry. No. Oh, that's cheating. Using the phone to do all the processing. So it's basically just a peripheral. That's like people being impressed with Siri, Google, and Alexa. That it's like, oh, the phone's doing it. It's like, no, it's not. It kind of amazes me that in this day and age, how easy to dupe people. Yes, Thundersqueak. That's what I was saying. That like the most of the smartphone features where you speak to it, it's not the phone doing that. They're just recording the audio and sending it off to, some other server which does all the lifting and then returns the value. So, I mean, you've really relegated the phone into like a walkie-talkie with that of a whole army of personnel there to service the request. All right, L1. It's actually easier for some reason to use the. That's really that much larger. The exploded diagram showing the component placement. L1 is placed next to the DC connector on the schematic. Where is it? Actually, part of the final amplifier. L2 is part of the low pass filter for the output, and L3 is actually part of the keying circuit. For the tube amplifier, which is over there, I was going to use copper foil. I would like to try to find some copper flashing. Doing a conversion that changes the grid circuit. It was originally used a suppressor voltage when you weren't keying the circuit. Uh, this modification takes out all of the original keying circuitry and the final amplifier changeover relay. switching it over to from the open frame into a vacuum relay, and a MOSFET that actually interrupts the code. So when you're in standby, it actually halts all flow of current through the tubes. Actually, supposed to extend the tube life and cut down on a tremendous amount of wasted heat when it's not actually transmitting. What is guitar copper foil thunder squeak? Uh, I went looking for roof flashing in like a hardware store and other places, and they want this ridiculous amount of money for it. And a lot of times, it's not even real copper flashing; it's just like copper colored aluminum, which I can't use. It's got to be actual copper. Do you know approximately what gauge the copper is? Because I have some that's about the thickness of like commercial grade aluminum foil, so it's pretty thick. But I was actually looking for something closer to like sheet copper, which are actual like sheet metal that's copper. And like Sears used to have something when they used to sell stuff like that. They don't sell hardware anymore, but it was like $50 for a piece that was like this big. Okay, now I'm curious. You're saying guitar foil, the foil in an actual guitar or for other music equipment, and why would you need copper in a musical instrument? Okay, thank you, Thunderspeak. I'll have to take a look at that link a little later on. It's over on the other bench, and I can just barely read it from where I'm sitting. 2 inch, 3/4 an inch, and quarter inch. Uh, 4.57 meters. Yeah, that would be like really, really overkill. Ah, okay. Yeah, I suppose I could disconnect the camera briefly and show you what I'm referring to. This is, you can see it on the side, a Heathkit SB100 HF linear amplifier. It's rated for about 700 watts output. It uses a pair of 572B tubes. And here are the sockets for the two tubes. And part of the modification calls for one of these two leads being connected to the ground plane here, using not just a thin wire like this. These are the filaments, and also the how the two is driven. But it wants you to use a very wide, either braid or perhaps foil. So I wanted to get a piece of copper enough to go around this whole area here and go from the correct lead directly to the aluminum ground plane. One of the things that I had thought about that I'm not going to do is replacing that whole piece of aluminum with a circuit board that has that part of the circuit already implemented. But I'd rather just get it working at this point and then consider maybe something else later. It's been sitting too long. So I'd rather just have it work. Be able to see my workbench. Really wide solder wick, like the stuff that's maybe a quarter of an inch or wider could be used. It was one of the things that was suggested, but I figured why not go overkill and just use like copper sheet or copper foil and just make a tremendously wide ground plane, because it is an RF circuit which benefits from the widest possible. One of the other things I was trying to accomplish by keeping it the path as short as possible is to not introduce any inductance in that circuit, because it's connected directly to the grid. So by keeping it very low inductance, any sort of resonant circuit that it might create would be hopefully up above the critical frequency of the tube, so that it wouldn't be anywhere in a range where it could break into oscillation. That was one of the problems, that not necessarily this one, but the SB220 that uses the iMac 3-500Z would run into, is that you would get these resonance circuits in depending on how the circuit was constructed, the people were thinking it was one problem or it was actually another. Like a lot of the practices of using these very low inductance silver-plated tank circuits were creating these resonant circuits within the tube, and then the tube would go into a VHF runaway, and people would, like, the fixes they were throwing at it were actually making the problem worse. L3 is right next to transistor 2. So I have a dummy load here and a power supply and a key. But the only thing that I might have trouble rigging up at this hour would be the oscilloscope to check the waveform, which I may not do this evening. It's already close to midnight. That's all the inductors. Go to the capacitors next. Capacitor 1, which is marked 104. It's most likely a ceramic disc. These. 471. 471. C1 is part of the input filter, which is right next to the power connector, and it's located right here. No surprise, the lead spacing on the board is really not appropriate for the capacitor. I don't know if you can see that, how this is pressed down as far as I can. The board, the component is still standing off the board. That drives me batty. Use a speaker and laser pointer. Laser pointers, huh? I've actually done that, of gluing a very small mirror to a crappy speaker and then bouncing a laser off of it. One of the things that I find a little disturbing is the red, green, blue lasers being sold on eBay, which are nothing more than just beam combiners and 3 separate lasers with control circuitry. How there's nothing that's really eye safe on the market. Everything they've got out there is, upwards of 100 milliwatts, or even several watts, and that's just madness. There's no real reasonable application that I can think of where you can project that and you're still not in danger from the backscatter from the beam wherever it lands. You pretty much have to wear laser goggles just to watch whatever the display is. Yeah, I mean, the other thing, Thundersqueak, about the lasers from eBay, especially from China, is that they are not always honest or accurate in their descriptions. That you may want something that's only 5 milliwatts, but you never know if they're actually selling you something that's actually a higher class laser and is actually dangerous to use. That's the thing that really scares me. Well, not everyone has access to a power meter, Thundersqueak. C2, 4, 8, and 11, which are all 103s, they're all 10 nanofarads. So, Thundersqueak, have you seen that news article that China apparently is now marketing a shoulderable laser cannon, supposedly able to cauterize human flesh? No, it's only $15,000. Runs from a giant lipo pack. I think you would probably be in more danger of holding the thing than the person standing in front of the business end of the thing. Probably more likely to burst into flames. You search for Chinese AK-47 like laser rifle. There's no real indication of what actual power level it is, but people had made joking reference to the 40-watt phased laser rifle from the Terminator movie. No thanks. I will not be holding anything that's 100 and something thousand volts while it's running. Yes, I agree with your comment. No way. All right, capacitor 2, which I'm putting in next, is 10 nanofarads. And either I'm getting tired or this thing's just not easy to read. Capacitor 2 on the schematic is where? C3, C4, C2. Oh, yes. I remember someone referring to these capacitors, at least in an RF circuit, referred to as molded mud. So I realize now that if I put this thing on the scope, that or even the vector network analyzer to test this filter, that it's probably going to be crap. Yeah, that is a real criticism against journalists. But a lot of times, the amount of ignorance they display in the subject matter they're covering is astounding. It's like, can you do this? It's like, no, that would kill you. Don't do that. as a just a reference to California politics, it amazes me how, with all the laws they pass, which you read them and then you shake your head and wonder how these people manage to breathe, that they don't go after the entertainment industry for the bad example that it portrays with the handling of firearms. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen someone at a public range or in a store doing something that is completely stupid because they think it's cool and they saw it in a movie. It's like, really, seriously, if you're going to show firearms and weapons in movies, please do so accurately. Capacitor 4, right next to the inductor. Yes, Thunder Squeak. It's a very good thing your friend remembered his anniversary before. Capacitor 8. Speaking of ridiculous state laws, I'm curious which one of the nanny states will be the first to pass a law mandating that everyone wear sunblock in public. and the means they go about to implement the law and fine people for not wearing sunblock in public. I realize the camera's like here and I'm working over here, so like most of it's off the screen probably, isn't it? That's all of the 10 nanofarad caps. Now we go to the 100 picofarad caps, which are marked 101. For some reason, I was just recall the Family Guy episode where Peter is speaking with his son about hobbies, uh, recalling the one with the stamp collecting. But then I was trying to recall if there was one with involving ham radio and him sort of poking fun at how boring it can be, supposedly. Yeah, at one time I had the PlayStation 2 network adapter. To my understanding, that was a workaround, very much like how Nintendo was able to circumvent the video game system restrictions in a lot of countries because it was considered an entertainment system, not quote unquote a video game. Capacitor 3, capacitor 7's right next to it because these are the molded mud caps for the filter. I'd have to check to see what QRP Labs has replaced the original ceramic ones with. That was, I think it was some sort of poly capacitor that works better with RF. No, I don't think you missed very much at all. It's about where I am. Uh, about 60% of the way through installing the capacitors. And I still have the some other components, which would be the crystal and the semiconductors, followed by the all the connectors are last. And then I'll be able to do a function check. Oh wow, I didn't realize how atrocious the frame rate is on this thing. Yeah, I'll have to find another light fixture to shed some more light on this. Capacitor 5 and 6 go where on the schematic? Wait, what? Oh, okay. Seems I had gotten ahead of myself. C5 and C6 are the output filter, and I thought I did those already, but I did not. Those were C3 and C7, which are part of the crystal oscillator feedback. C5 and C6 are over here on the edge of the board by the output connector. I'm going to reform these with my trusty pliers. How's that Romulan ale doing? That's weird. Guess I'll have to file a grievance with the NSA coders on this phone to stop interfering with the camera. the video come back, I ended up having to switch the camera to selfie mode and back, and apparently got the picture to return. C9 and 10. Grainy. Alright, all the caps have been installed. Next, the diodes are next. These are 1N4001 supposedly. Diode 1 goes by the power connector, which is a little surprise. I have noted over the years on things like diodes getting chintzier with the leads, whereas the diodes years ago you could tell that the leads were a lot thicker than they are now. Especially this one here, it seems like they've, can't really say percentage wise, it's definitely noticeably thinner. Whereas the leads used to be nice and stiff and would just barely fit in the hole for your typical through hole size. Like these are a little bigger than usual, whereas the this 8-pin dip, those holes are slightly larger than would encounter with, say, like a Radio Shack perf board. You know, that actually took me a minute to for that comment to sink in. I think it was the question mark. Seems to be the thing about sophomoric humor. It's always funny. Just as you get older, you have to pretend it's not. Take a quick break for something to. Sour cherry and pomegranate. Your first CNC machine, huh, Thundersqueak? Did it teach you things like how to deal with backlash? I remember, like, gee, this I'll just get some nuts and put them on some all thread, and that'll work, right? Nope. So 1N 4148. Oh wow, it is. Typically, these are usually substituted for 1N 914s. It's kind of neat. Diode number three. Diode number three is appears to be what is this detector? Yeah, thunder squeak. I can see the image. That the T nuts that I bought to upgrade my printer are similar to that, where they've just machined the mounting flange off, and they've male female notch, so that you have the one T nut with the flange, and then a spring that goes behind it, and then the bottom portion, which is basically like another T nut that's got was cut in half and it has two barbs that stick out, and then you mesh them together on the all thread. So you got the spring pushing the two of them apart, and then they have the interference of the tabs knocking back and forth. So it's supposed to help take up some of the backlash. Yeah, you figured it out on your own. Yeah, I guess you could imagine how small the internet was. Oh yeah, 20 years ago. Would have been in '98. There wasn't much on there back then. Certainly, trying to buy anything was kind of fun. It's usually like you can order. It's like, now call us and give us your credit card number. It's like, ugh. What is a 9018 transistor? I have no idea. Yeah, the parts diagram calls these two NPN transistors a 9018, and the other one is an 8050. I've never heard those part numbers before. I don't even know what the equivalent is. Google says it's a part produced by Caterpillar. Funny, I don't see any diesel injector nozzles in with the kit. No. I have my doubts of just how stable this crystal is going to be. I hope that it's at least moderately close to where it should be. FM transmitters. Yeah, I haven't heard back from the guy on. I think it was Tindy that does a lot of the kits out of Japan. He built an FM broadcast walkie-talkie with the Silicon Labs part that I had brought to his attention. I thought it was unusual that this part incorporated both the an FM stereo receiver along with the transmitter, and it had the capability of encoding and decoding the RDS data format, which I thought was kind of neat. It's quite literally a an FM broadcast band modem. For as useful as 1,200 bits per second is. At least in here in the states, it's FCC type approved for Part 15 usage on the lower portion of the band, which is kind of neat. Not like anybody seems to pay attention to that, you know, following the whole laws of the land when it comes to communications and wireless stuff. Everyone's all too happy to just do whatever they want. Other thing I find amusing is how electrolytic capacitors, they mark the negative lead, and on the circuit boards they almost always indicate the positive lead. Why is that? Most of the electrolytics. I didn't check too closely to see if the silk screen is correct, but I'm sure I'll find out as soon as I power it up. If I have any surprises. I'll be able to test this thing, but before I can actually get the thing on the air, I'm going to have to get that 3D printer going so that I can print up some mounts for my vacuum capacitor and finish my magnetic loop antenna. So I'm very limited on the types of antennas that I can set up here, which is basically nothing useful for HF. I'm actually kind of amazed and surprised that you know, they included a socket for the IC chip. Just an LM386 audio amp. In reference to the IDE to SATA conversion, there are parallel ATA to serial ATA adapters that work in both directions. So, well, so you just plug it onto whatever IDE interface is in there, and then you've got the SATA connector, and then you can use your better question. Why do you need a solid state drive in an IBM PS2? Oh, okay. Yes, a PlayStation 2. Now I understand. Um, couldn't you somehow fit that into the adapter? Because if I recall, the network adapter for the PlayStation 2 was designed to use 3.5-inch drives. If you went down to a 2.5-inch or the laptop drive, that should give you enough room to be able to wrangle something in there to fit, to go from the IDE and the power down to the SATA and still have like basically a 3.5 inch to the smaller laptop format adapter. It does the size format along with the conversion to go to SATA. Yeah, but wouldn't the solid state drive end up getting burned up faster than the mechanical drive because of the wear? Not only is there no wear leveling, but just I really have no idea how much reading and writing, or specifically how much writing the PlayStation does to the drive. It's something that the mechanical drive is pretty much unlimited. What I'm doing off camera here is just tack soldering this connector on by holding it in place, which is why I'm not doing it over or under the camera. With the connector tacked in place, I can then solder all the other pins in place to have a nice solid connection. Last connector. This thing actually was laid out well enough that you could probably pretty easily have an enclosure made for this with the back of it. Almost. This crystal and these resistors in a little bit further, you could use an extruded case and just have it slide in with backing plates here and here, whereas a bent aluminum case, you could have it mounted off of these on one side, have a hole for the power here, and then for this might be difficult. If I just notch it and then put the nut on. I'm actually going to trim these first. I know what's going to happen if I don't. The solder will heat up so much that when I try to cut it, the cutters will cam off of the connection. Thunderspeak, the answer to your question of why so few subscribers, it would help if I would stream something, more than once every 2 years. Yeah, well, it seems that you have content that's more popular than mine is, other than staring at some guy soldering something together and saying something once every couple of minutes, for over 2 hours. Alright, well, there you have it. One Pixie 40 meter CW transceiver. I am now tired. I will test this some other time. So that's all, folks.